People see a woman sitting alone, and they whisper like it's a tragedy. They see her walking without a circle of friends and label her lonely. They see the empty seats around her and think it means she has no value. But what they don't understand is that this solitude isn't a weakness, it's a training ground. This is where her vision sharpens, where her strength is forged, where her character is tested in silence. A woman with no friends isn't a woman with no power. She's a woman who refuses to settle for counterfeit connections. The world worships popularity, but popularity is cheap. It's noisy and temporary. It disappears the moment you stop entertaining. But legacy is quiet. Legacy is patient. Legacy is built in the hours when nobody is watching. And sometimes to build a legacy, you have to walk alone. So, I don't pity the woman with no friends. I respect her. While you're busy searching for company, she's searching for alignment. While you're chasing approval, she's chasing purpose. While you're playing for the crowd, she's building for eternity. A woman with no friends isn't invisible, she's unstoppable. When people hear the phrase, a woman with no friends, they usually think of loneliness first. They imagine a life with no calls, no check-ins, no one to share laughs or cry with. The picture in their mind is heavy, almost tragic, like something is missing. But if you really step back and look deeper, what they call isolation can often become independence. What the world calls alone, she might call free. When you don't have friends crowding your circle, when you don't have noise in your ear every day, you get a rare gift that most people never learn to handle: silence. And that quiet space can either crush you or build you. It all depends on how you see it. For a woman with no friends, that solitude becomes a mirror. Every moment by herself forces her to see herself with no filters, no distractions, and no outside voices telling her who she is or who she should be. Many people don't truly know themselves because they've never had to sit alone long enough to ask those hard questions. They keep people around just to avoid the echo of their own thoughts. But when you have no one else, when the phone doesn't ring and your social calendar is empty, you either fall apart or you build yourself into something unshakable. That's where independence is born. Most people live their lives reacting to what their friends say, what their crew is doing, and the opinions and expectations around them. But a woman with no friends doesn't have that kind of noise. She moves to her own rhythm. She doesn't need approval before she takes a step. She doesn't need a green light from the group chat before she decides what's right for her. That's independence in its purest form, moving because you choose to, not because somebody else pushed you in that direction. But here's the deeper part. Society doesn't always respect that kind of independence, especially in women. They try to label her as cold, antisocial, or bitter. They can't imagine that maybe she just doesn't need to be surrounded to feel complete. Maybe she understands that having no friends doesn't mean having no value. It means she values her peace more than she values popularity. And when a woman gets comfortable enough to stand on her own, that's when people start paying attention because the truth is, most people can't handle it. The difference between isolation and independence is all about mindset. Isolation is when you feel trapped in your solitude, waiting for someone to come fill the space. Independence is when you take that same solitude and turn it into fuel. It's when you say, I got me. I trust me. I believe in me. I move with me. That's not a punishment. That's power. Once you learn how to survive and thrive without constant company, you stop being afraid of being left out. You stop being afraid of being abandoned. No one can use loneliness as a weapon against you if you've already turned that loneliness into strength. And it's not just about sitting alone in a room, it's about what you build in that room. A woman with no friends often finds herself pouring her energy into her vision, her craft, and her goals. She has hours of focus that someone else might waste on gossip or chasing validation. She can take the pain of not having people around and turn it into productivity, wisdom, or art. That's how legacies are built. Some of the strongest people didn't rise because they had a crew holding them down. They rose because they had nobody and had to figure it out with nothing but their own drive. When you depend on friends too much, you depend on borrowed energy, and borrowed energy runs out. But when you learn to pull from yourself, when you teach yourself discipline, and when you master your own space, that's a battery nobody can drain. That's why what the world sees as isolation can actually be the birth of independence. Once she learns she doesn't need a circle to keep her standing, she becomes unstoppable. She can still welcome people, she can still love, and she can still connect. But it won't be out of desperation, it will be out of choice. She chooses who enters her space, not because she needs them to survive, but because she wants them to be part of what she's already built. The beauty of a woman with no friends is that she redefines what strength looks like. Strength doesn't always come with a crowd cheering you on. Sometimes, strength comes in the silence of your own apartment, in the late-night talks with yourself, and in the moments where you break down and wipe your own tears because there's nobody else around to do it. That independence becomes like armor, not a cold armor that shuts people out, but a sacred armor that keeps her grounded and whole. So when people say she has no friends, they might think it's an insult or a weakness. But if you look closely, that's often the foundation of her independence. She's learning lessons in silence that the loudest, most surrounded people never will. She's not weighed down by the expectations of a circle. She's not distracted by the noise of unnecessary voices. She's free to design her life on her own terms. And that freedom, that independence, is more valuable than any crowd she could ever chase. Strength in solitude is one of those lessons life teaches you when you don't have the comfort of a crowd to lean on. For a woman with no friends, solitude isn't just an occasional visitor, it becomes a permanent roommate. And while that might sound heavy to some, it carries a hidden advantage that only a few people in this world ever get to experience. Solitude is where strength is born because when you're left alone, you find out real quick whether you can carry your own weight. The world is noisy, full of distractions, opinions, and people telling you how to move and what to think. But solitude strips all that away. It leaves you with nothing but yourself. And in that silence, you either fold or you grow a muscle you didn't even know you had. When a woman spends time in solitude, she starts to hear her own voice clearly. Not the voice her family told her to have, not the voice her friends shaped for her, but her own voice. That's powerful because most people live their entire lives with the volume of their own soul turned down low. They keep the TV on, the music loud, and the phone buzzing with constant conversations because they don't want to face themselves. But when solitude is forced on you, you have no choice. You have to sit there and deal with your own reflection, your own mistakes, your own dreams, and your own doubts. That's where strength gets built, not in the spotlight, but in the quiet corners where nobody's watching. Solitude is a gym for the mind and spirit. Every moment alone is like lifting weights, not on your body, but on your soul. It tests your patience, your discipline, and your ability to keep believing when there's nobody clapping for you. Imagine training for a marathon with no crowd on the sidelines, no coach cheering you on, and no teammate running next to you. Just you and the road. That's what solitude feels like. And if you can run that race, if you can train in silence with no applause, you build a strength that can't be taken from you. Because when the applause finally comes, it won't define you. You'll know you already had it in you before anyone else noticed. For a woman with no friends, solitude also means becoming her own comfort, her own healer, and her own motivator. On the nights when the weight feels too heavy, she learns how to soothe herself and remind herself of her own worth. That's not weakness, that's resilience. Anyone can feel strong when they have a support system, when they have a group hyping them up. But real strength is when you can look in the mirror with no makeup, no filters, no validation, and still tell yourself, I'm enough. I'm built for this. That kind of self-talk is forged in solitude when nobody else is there to tell you those words. And solitude doesn't just create emotional strength, it creates vision. When you have space and quiet, your mind stretches in ways it can't when you're constantly surrounded. That's why some of the greatest ideas and most legendary breakthroughs come from people who knew how to embrace being alone. A woman with no friends can sit with her thoughts long enough to connect the dots, to imagine possibilities, and to sharpen her goals. While others are out wasting energy trying to fit in, she's building clarity. She's not distracted by drama, gossip, or the constant pull of social circles. She's in her own lane, and in that lane, she starts to see the road more clearly than anyone else. Strength in solitude is also about learning how to move without depending on outside energy. Many people are addicted to being surrounded because they don't know how to generate their own fuel. They need someone to inspire them, someone to push them, someone to make them feel valuable. But when a woman learns how to survive in solitude, she becomes her own generator. She doesn't need borrowed energy. She doesn't need someone else's push. She builds her own fire. And that fire burns steady because it's rooted in her own soul. That's independence, but it's also strength because once you know how to stand alone, you become unshakable even when the world around you collapses. It's not easy, though. Solitude can feel like a cage at first. It can feel like punishment. People will even tell her something's wrong, as if being alone means being broken. But with time, she starts to see it differently. That cage was actually a classroom. It forced her to learn lessons most people never face. Lessons about patience, resilience, and knowing your own worth without having to prove it to anyone else. Those lessons are invisible to the outside eye, but they shape her character. And character is what carries you through storms when talent, beauty, or charm fade away. There's also a spiritual side to solitude. When you're alone, you can hear things you'd miss in the noise. Call it intuition, call it God, call it the universe, whatever name you give it, it's a deeper voice that speaks in silence. A woman with no friends often finds herself in tune with that voice. She starts to trust it. She starts to follow it. And that trust builds strength like nothing else. Because once you believe you're being guided, once you feel that inner connection, you stop chasing outside validation. You know you're exactly where you're meant to be, even if it's just you standing there. That's the gift of solitude. It doesn't just strip you bare. It rebuilds you stronger. It makes you sharp. It makes you resilient. It makes you unbreakable. A woman who has been through solitude and found her strength, there is a woman you can't control, manipulate, or break because she already proved to herself that she can carry the weight alone. The power of self-love is one of the most underestimated forces in the world. And for a woman with no friends, it often becomes her only lifeline. When there's nobody around to clap for you, to hype you up, or to remind you that you're worthy, the only voice you have left is your own. At first, that silence can be brutal because the world conditions people to depend on approval. From childhood, we're trained to measure ourselves by who likes us, who sits with us, and who calls us their friend. But when a woman finds herself outside that system, when she doesn't have a circle to validate her, she's forced to discover something deeper. She has to become her own mirror, her own cheerleader, and her own safe space. And when she learns that art, she taps into a power that nobody can take away. Self-love in that context isn't about posting cute quotes online or pampering yourself with a spa day. It's about survival. It's about waking up and reminding yourself that you are worthy, even if the world acts like you're invisible. It's about talking yourself through the days when rejection feels heavy, when memories of betrayal sit on your chest, and when you look around and realize no one is coming to rescue you. Self-love becomes the anchor that holds you steady when everything else is unsteady. It's not glamorous. It's not always pretty. But it's real. For a woman with no friends, self-love teaches her to stop looking for her reflection in other people's eyes, because that's the trap most people fall into. They measure their beauty, their intelligence, and their value by how others respond to them. If people laugh at their jokes, they feel funny. If people compliment their outfit, they feel attractive. If people approve of their decisions, they feel smart. But when you don't have that constant feedback, you're forced to look within and ask yourself, do I like me? Do I approve of me? Do I believe in me? And once you can answer yes to those questions without needing anyone else's stamp, that's liberation. The power of self-love also shows up in boundaries. A woman who learns to love herself in solitude won't just let anybody walk into her life and mistreat her. When you're desperate for friendship or attention, you'll settle for toxic people, fake support, or shallow connections just to fill the void. But a woman who has mastered self-love already knows she's enough. So she'd rather stand alone than shrink herself for company. The strength of self-love. That's why self-love is true strength. It teaches you to be selective, to protect your space, and to honor your peace. She doesn't beg for a seat at a table where she's not respected. She builds her own table and sits comfortably by herself if she has to. It's not easy to get there. It takes breaking cycles of self-doubt and unlearning the lies planted by family, society, and past friendships that turn sour. She has to fight her own inner critic, the one that says she's not enough, the one that whispers she must be flawed if she doesn't have friends. Self-love becomes a daily practice of shutting down those voices and choosing new ones. It's choosing to affirm herself, to treat herself kindly, and to forgive herself for mistakes. It's not a one-time thing. It's a discipline, a muscle you build every day. There's also a creative energy that comes from self-love. When you're not begging people to see you, you start creating for yourself. Maybe you write, maybe you paint, or maybe you build a business. You pour energy into your health or your craft from a place of genuine care for yourself, not to impress anyone or gain approval. That authenticity shines because it's rooted in love, not in neediness. People start to notice, but by then, it doesn't even matter because you already validated yourself long before the world caught up. Self-love is also about resilience. When life knocks you down and there's no friend to lift you up, you have to decide to lift yourself. You have to remind yourself that you've been through worse, that you're still standing, and that you deserve to get back up and try again. That resilience, born out of loving yourself enough to keep fighting, becomes unbreakable. Once you develop it, you move differently. You don't fear abandonment. You don't beg for acceptance. You don't lose yourself in relationships because you know you'll be okay either way. The world often looks at a woman with no friends and thinks she must be lacking something. But maybe she's not lacking. Maybe she's overflowing with self-respect, self-awareness, and self-love to the point where she won't compromise for company. Maybe she understands her energy is too valuable to waste on shallow connections. Maybe she'd rather sit in silence with herself than fill her life with noise that doesn't build her. That's the kind of power most people don't even recognize because they've never lived it. The real beauty of self-love is that once a woman learns it, she can give love without losing herself. She can enter friendships, relationships, and partnerships from a place of fullness, not emptiness. She doesn't cling, beg, or settle because she already loves herself enough to walk away if it costs her peace. That's when love becomes healthy. That's when connection becomes real, because it's rooted in choice, not desperation. The power of self-love is more than just a feel-good slogan. For a woman with no friends, it's the foundation that keeps her steady. It's the reason she can wake up every day and still stand tall even when the room is empty. It's the reason she can build without applause, dream without validation, and live without fear of abandonment. And that kind of power, once unlocked, makes her unstoppable. The lessons of trust and betrayal. Trust and betrayal are some of the deepest lessons a woman with no friends has to carry, because most of the time she didn't end up friendless by accident. People don't just wake up and decide they don't need anybody. More often than not, the story behind her solitude is written in chapters of betrayal, chapters where trust was given freely and then mishandled, chapters where loyalty wasn't returned. She learned the hard way that not every smile is sincere and not every hand extended is meant to hold you up. Sometimes it's meant to pull you down. Once you've been through that enough times, once you've seen the mask slip off people you thought would never hurt you, it becomes easier to choose silence, easier to choose distance, easier to protect your heart by keeping your circle empty. Trust is fragile. And when it's broken, it doesn't just disappear, it leaves scars. A woman with no friends often carries those scars in silence. She remembers the conversations she thought were safe that ended up in the mouths of strangers. She remembers the time she leaned on someone and they weren't there. Each betrayal doesn't just hurt in the moment. It reshapes how she sees people, how she sees herself, and how she moves through the world. After enough letdowns, she starts to realize that maybe having no friends is safer than having the wrong ones. The pain of betrayal runs deep because trust is sacred. To trust someone is to give them access to the most vulnerable parts of you. When someone betrays that, they don't just betray your trust, they betray your faith in humanity. It makes you question your judgment and second-guess your instincts. That's why betrayal is one of the hardest things to recover from. It shakes the very foundation you stand on. For a woman with no friends, trust becomes something she guards like a treasure. She doesn't hand it out easily. She pays attention to actions, not words. She learns that loyalty isn't what people say when they're smiling in your face, it's what they do when your back is turned. She learns that betrayal doesn't always come from enemies. Most of the time, it comes from the people you let closest to you. And once you understand that, you move differently. You build walls, not out of bitterness, but out of protection. Betrayal can also be a blessing because it forces clarity. It shows you who is real and who isn't. It cuts away the fake so you can see the truth. A woman with no friends may have lost people, but she gained wisdom. She gained the ability to read between the lines, to catch the energy behind the words, and to sense when someone's intentions aren't clean. That's a kind of strength that can't be taught in books. It can only be learned through experience and pain. And once she's walked through that fire, she doesn't fear it anymore. Betrayal also shapes how she trusts herself. After being betrayed, one of the hardest parts is forgiving herself for not seeing it sooner. A woman who's been through that has to wrestle with the voice in her head that says she should have known better. But in time, if she does the work, she learns that being betrayed doesn't mean she was weak, it means she was open. It means she had a heart willing to believe in others. That's not weakness, that's humanity. Once she forgives herself, she learns to trust her own instincts again. She learns that her gut was speaking, even if she ignored it back then, and she promises herself she won't ignore it again. That's the rebirth after betrayal, not just losing faith in others, but regaining faith in yourself. What makes trust so powerful for a woman with no friends is that when she finally chooses to give it again, it means something. If she lets someone into her space, if she shares her heart, if she calls you family, that's not casual, that's sacred. You're stepping into a space that was locked for a long time, guarded by pain and lessons. You're receiving a gift that cost her years of healing to be able to give again. The connection between trust and betrayal explains why she walks with such caution. She's not bitter, she's wise. She's not cold, she's careful. She understands that trust is currency, and she refuses to spend it where it won't multiply. She's not interested in being surrounded by people who drain her. She'd rather stand alone than share her energy with people who don't honor it. That's not loneliness, that's discernment. And that discernment is born from betrayal. So, when people see a woman with no friends, they might assume she's antisocial or doesn't know how to connect. But the truth is, she probably knows how to connect too deeply, too sincerely, too real for a world that often thrives on shallow ties. She knows the cost of betrayal, and she's not willing to pay it again just to say she's surrounded. She values her peace more than she values appearances. That choice, though it might look lonely from the outside, is the ultimate act of self-respect. Legacy over popularity. Popularity is a game most people get caught up in. For a woman with no friends, it's a game she usually steps away from, not because she can't play it, but because she understands how empty it is. Popularity feeds the ego. Legacy feeds the soul. Popularity dies when the crowd changes. Legacy lives long after you're gone. Once you've seen how quickly people can turn on you, how fast their cheers can turn into silence, you stop chasing it. You stop begging for likes. You stop measuring your value by numbers. You stop trying to fit into circles that don't see your vision. You start realizing that every minute you waste trying to be liked is a minute stolen from the work you could be doing to leave something behind. A woman with no friends often feels that difference more sharply than most because she's already experienced what it feels like to be excluded and overlooked. At first, it hurts because we're wired to want belonging. But over time, she learns that being overlooked is actually freedom. If nobody's watching, she can build without distraction. If nobody's clapping, she can grind without interruption. If nobody's asking for attention, she can pour that energy into her purpose. That's the trade-off. When you're not tied to popularity, you can focus fully on legacy. Legacy is bigger than the moment. It's not about being known. It's about being remembered. It's not about noise. It's about impact. A woman with no friends often understands this on a level most don't because she's not busy trying to maintain a social calendar. She's busy trying to maintain her vision. She's not distracted by shallow connections. She's dedicated to building something solid, something that speaks when she's not in the room. Popularity is addictive because it feels good in the moment. The praise, the attention, it can give you a high. But the problem is that high fades, and you're left chasing it again and again. Legacy doesn't fade. Legacy multiplies. It's when the work you did, the character you showed, and the energy you carried keeps echoing beyond you. That's why legacy takes patience. It's slow and quiet. It's not glamorous while you're building it. You won't always get recognition, but once it's done, it stands. It lasts. It can't be erased. For a woman with no friends, choosing legacy over popularity also means she learns to detach from the need for constant validation. She doesn't care if her moves are celebrated today because she knows her moves are designed for tomorrow. She doesn't get discouraged when people don't notice because she knows the seed is still growing underground before anyone sees it sprout. She doesn't water her dreams with attention, she waters them with discipline. And discipline always pays back more than applause. There's also a kind of courage in rejecting popularity. Popularity usually demands you to fit in, to follow trends, to play along with what everyone else is doing. But legacy demands originality. It demands authenticity. It demands you to be so rooted in your own purpose that you're willing to stand out even if it means standing alone. That's why a woman with no friends can thrive in legacy building. She's already comfortable outside the crowd. She's already learned how to survive without being chosen, so she's not afraid to be different. That difference becomes her strength. When you focus on legacy, your standards change. You stop caring about who knows you and start caring about what you stand for. You stop caring about how many people are around you and start caring about how many lives you touch. You stop chasing quick wins and start building foundations that can't be shaken. That mindset shift is powerful because once you taste the purpose of legacy, the shallow sweetness of popularity doesn't tempt you anymore. You realize it's not about being loud now. It's about being lasting forever. People who chase popularity are often left feeling empty. But people who build legacy are full even when they're alone because they know their solitude isn't wasted, it's invested. Every hour alone with her thoughts, every day grinding without applause, every sacrifice that looks invisible to the outside world is actually stacking bricks for something permanent. And when the time comes, when the world finally notices, it's undeniable because the work speaks louder than the crowd ever could. Legacy over popularity is also about respect. Popularity might get you attention, but it doesn't guarantee respect. People can like you and not value you. They can cheer for you but not stand with you. Respect comes when your actions match your words, when your character holds steady even when no one is watching, when your vision proves bigger than your ego. A woman with no friends often ends up more respected than she realizes because while everyone else was busy being seen, she was busy becoming solid. And respect always lasts longer than applause. The beauty of choosing legacy over popularity is that it flips loneliness into leverage. A woman with no friends doesn't waste time trying to be everywhere with everyone. She's focused on being somewhere with meaning. She doesn't spread herself thin to stay visible. She concentrates herself fully to stay impactful. And when you move like that, when your energy is locked into building instead of pleasing, you end up leaving a mark that outlives you. That's the true power. When your name means something, not because it was shouted in a crowd, but because it was carved into history. Loneliness versus alignment. Loneliness and alignment look the same on the surface, but they couldn't be more different. To the outside world, a woman with no friends looks lonely. They see her moving by herself, eating by herself, and showing up without a crew, and they assume something is missing. But what they don't see is the possibility that maybe she's not lonely at all. Maybe she's just waiting for alignment. There's a big difference between having nobody around because nobody wants to be there and choosing to keep people out because they don't fit the vision. One is emptiness. The other is discipline. One drains you. The other protects you. And that's where the strength lies, in knowing the difference. Loneliness feels heavy because it's rooted in lack. It's the feeling of wanting company but not having it. It whispers that you're forgotten and unwanted. It can crush your spirit because it keeps your focus on what you don't have. Alignment, though, flips that whole energy. Alignment says, I'm not empty, I'm selective. It says, I'd rather hold space for the right people than fill it with the wrong ones. It says, my peace is more valuable than a crowded room. My spirit is more important than my social calendar. My growth matters more than being included. That's not loneliness, that's alignment. And it's one of the most powerful positions you can take. A woman with no friends learns that lesson the hard way. At first, the absence feels like loneliness and rejection. But with time, she starts to see that not everyone is meant to walk with her. Not everybody is capable of understanding her vision. Not everybody has the character to hold her secrets or the loyalty to stand in the storm with her. And once she sees that, she stops begging for companionship and starts valuing alignment, because she knows the wrong company can cost her more than solitude ever will. Alignment requires patience. It means she has to say no when it's tempting to say yes. It means she has to walk away from circles that make her feel small, from friendships that drain her energy, and from people who only show up when it benefits them. It means she has to believe that holding out for the right connections will pay off, even when the wait feels long. That patience builds strength because it forces her to trust her own worth. It forces her to believe that she's deserving of relationships that don't require her to shrink or compromise her peace. The world doesn't always respect that choice, though. They'll say she's difficult, antisocial, or lonely. They'll project their own fear of being alone onto her because they don't understand the power of alignment. Most people would rather sit at a table that disrespects them than stand in silence by themselves. But a woman who values alignment knows that the empty chair beside her is better than filling it with someone who doesn't value her presence. That's a lesson most people never learn because they confuse quantity with quality. Alignment also means that when the right people finally do show up, the connection is pure. It's not forced. It's not desperate. It's not built on shallow things like gossip or convenience. It's built on shared values, mutual respect, and genuine energy. That kind of connection lasts longer because it's rooted in truth. And a woman who has been through seasons of solitude can recognize it instantly. She knows the difference between someone who's aligned with her and someone who is just passing time with her. That discernment protects her. It saves her from repeating the cycles of betrayal and disappointment that made her step back in the first place. The power of alignment also shows in how she moves even before the right people arrive. She doesn't wait for others to validate her. She's already building her life, chasing her vision, and creating her legacy. That way, when aligned people do come into her space, they're not completing her, they're complementing her. She's whole on her own, and they're just adding to the light she already carried. That's what makes alignment beautiful. It's not about needing someone to fill your gaps. It's about sharing the fullness you've already built. Loneliness weakens you because it convinces you to settle just so you won't feel empty. Alignment strengthens you because it teaches you to wait until what's meant for you arrives. A woman with no friends who embraces alignment learns that her solitude isn't a punishment, it's preparation. Every season without friends is training her to recognize real ones. Every moment she spends alone is sharpening her vision so she can spot who is genuine and who is fake. Every hour she uses to invest in herself is building a version of her that won't collapse the moment someone else walks away. What looks like loneliness to the outside world is often alignment at work behind the scenes. And when alignment finally shows up, when the right people enter her space, it doesn't look like a crowd, it looks like a tribe. It doesn't look like popularity, it looks like partnership. It doesn't look like noise, it looks like harmony. That's the reward of waiting, the reward of choosing alignment over loneliness. So, when you hear the words, a woman with no friends, don't see emptiness. See evolution. See a woman who turned isolation into independence. See a woman who found strength in solitude, who discovered the power of self-love when no one else was around to give it. See a woman who walked through betrayal and still chose to protect her heart with wisdom instead of bitterness. See a woman who values legacy over popularity and builds something eternal instead of chasing moments that fade. See a woman who is not lonely but aligned, waiting for what matches her spirit and refusing to settle for less. It's not a sad story. It's a victory. Because a woman who can stand tall with no friends is a woman who can't be broken by the loss of them. She's whole before the world recognizes it, powerful before the crowd acknowledges it, and unstoppable before anyone else believes it. And when she finally decides to let people in, they won't complete her. They'll join her because she already completed herself. A woman with no friends is not a woman without value. She's a woman who found hers without permission.